The towering pines of Elkridge cast long shadows over Elijah Mason as he split another cord of wood. His massive hands, calloused from years in the wilderness, gripped the axe with quiet authority. Down in the valley, 8-year-old Tommy watched from behind his mother's clothesline, studying every move the mountain man made. The boy knew hunger, knew the ache of empty spaces in his belly, in their cabin, in the chair where his father once sat. Sarah worked double shifts at the general store, her slim shoulders carrying the weight of their survival. Tommy had watched Mr. Mason fight off wolves, repair cabins single-handed, and stand like a wall against winter storms. Could a man that strong fill the emptiness that haunted their little home? What would happen if a broken-hearted boy asked a lone wolf to become a father? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The general store bell jangled as Maria wiped her brow with a flour-sacked apron. 10 hours on her feet, and still 2 more to go before Mr. Holloway would let her close up. Through the dusty window she could see Tommy sitting on the boardwalk, whittling away at a stick with the small pocket knife his father had left him. Beside him lay the wooden toy horse, Joseph's last gift to his son before the mining accident. "Mrs. Alvarez, I need these shipment forms by morning," Mr. Holloway called, dropping another stack of papers on her already crowded counter. Maria nodded, tucking a strand of dark hair behind her ear. "Yes, sir. I'll have them ready." Outside, Tommy looked up as 3 older boys approached. Maria tensed, watching through the window as they circled her son. "What you got there, half-pint?" The tallest one snatched the wooden horse. "Give it back, Billy," Tommy said, his voice steady despite his trembling hands. "Or what? You gonna tell your pa?" "Oh, wait," Billy sneered. "You ain't got one." Maria was already untying her apron when the boys suddenly straightened, their faces shifting from mockery to nervous respect. A shadow fell across the boardwalk as Elijah Mason's massive frame approached. Without a word, he extended his hand toward Billy. The boy immediately surrendered the toy horse, then scampered away with his friend. Elijah returned the horse to Tommy with a gentle nod before continuing down the street toward Benson's Hardware. Tommy clutched the treasure to his chest, watching the mountain man with undisguised awe. Later, as Maria counted inventory, she glanced up to see Elijah entering the store, ducking his head beneath the doorframe. He moved quietly for such a large man, his rough canvas coat dusted with sawdust and pine needles. The other customers gave him a wide berth. The mountain man came to town rarely, and rumors about his past swirled like autumn leaves. "Evening, Mr. Mason," Maria said, professional courtesy masking her own curiosity. He nodded, placing a small list on the counter. His handwriting was surprisingly neat. "Just the basics, ma'am." As Maria gathered his supplies, Tommy slipped into the store and edged closer, the wooden horse clutched in his small hand. "Thank you, Mr. Mason, for earlier." Elijah looked down at the boy, his weathered face softening slightly. "No trouble, son. Did you really fight off a grizzly with just a hunting knife?" Tommy asked, eyes wide with boyish wonder. The corner of Elijah's mouth twitched. "Papers exaggerate. But you did fight one." A pause. "Yes." Maria returned with his supplies, noting how her normally shy son stood comfortably in the big man's presence. "Tommy, don't bother Mr. Mason with questions." "It's no bother," Elijah said, his voice like distant thunder, low and rumbling. He looked at the wooden horse in Tommy's hand. "Nice craftsmanship." "My pa made it," Tommy said, pride and sadness mingling in his voice. Before the cave-in, something flashed in Elijah's eyes, recognition perhaps, or memory. He paid for his supplies, then reached into his pocket and pulled out a small carved wolf. "Here, something to keep that horse company." Tommy accepted the gift with reverent hands. "Wow, did you make this?" Elijah nodded, then tipped his hat to Maria. "Ma." As he turned to leave, Maria noticed him pausing to lift a heavy sack of flour that had been delivered for her to carry home after work. Without comment, he placed it by the door where she wouldn't have to drag it from the storeroom. "Wait," she called. retrieving a small jar of honey. "For your help today with the boys." Elijah hesitated before accepting it with calloused hands. "Much obliged." After he'd gone, Mr. Holloway emerged from the back room, frowning. "I wouldn't get friendly with that one, Mrs. Alvarez. Man's got shadows following him." "Don't we all?" Maria replied softly, watching through the window as Elijah paused to help old Mrs. Finch with her wagon wheel before disappearing back toward the mountains, a solitary figure against the setting sun. Tommy stood beside her, the wooden horse and wolf clutched together in his small hands, his eyes following the mountain man until he vanished from sight. The wedding ring hung on a thin chain around Maria's neck, catching the lantern light as she sat by Tommy's bed. The fever had broken, but his dreams still seemed troubled. She brushed damp hair from his forehead, humming the lullaby her own mother had sung, the one she'd later sung to Joseph during those cold nights when the mind's shadows clung to him. "Pa," Tommy mumbled, half asleep. "It's Mama, mi corazón," she whispered. "Just Mama." His eyes fluttered closed again. Maria touched the gold band at her throat, remembering Joseph's calloused fingers, sliding it onto hers, his smile bright against his coal-dusted face. 5 years gone, yet some mornings she still reached across the empty sheets. "He needs more than just me," she confessed to the ring. "But how do I let you go?" The next morning, Maria hurried Tommy to school before opening the store. At the counter, Widow Parsons leaned close, her voice dropping conspiratorially. "That mountain man was asking after you yesterday." Maria continued stacking tins. "Mr. Mason? What about? Wanted to know if you needed help with firewood. What with winter coming?" Widow Parsons raised an eyebrow, mighty considerate for a man who barely speaks to anyone. "He's just being neighborly," Maria replied. "Neighborly?" Widow Parsons chuckled. "That man lives half a day's ride up the mountain. Folks say he came from back east. Some kind of tragedy. Wife and child, I heard." Maria's hands stilled. "People talk too much." "Just saying." Widow with a young boy might catch a lonely man's eye. "I'm not looking to catch anyone's eye, Edith." Later, as grey clouds gathered over Elkridge, Maria found herself glancing toward the mountains. What kind of home had Elijah Mason built up there? Tommy's stories painted a picture of a cabin fortress where the mountain man tracked elk, tanned hides, and lived free from the town's small concerns. The first drops of rain spattered the window as the wind picked up. By closing time, the storm had transformed into a howling gale that bent the pines and sent barrels rolling down Main Street. "Mama, look." Tommy pressed his face to the glass as they prepared to leave. Through the rain, a familiar broad-shouldered silhouette moved purposefully down the street. Elijah was helping secure loose shutters on the schoolhouse, his powerful frame braced against the wind as he hammered. They watched as he moved methodically from building to building, joining the handful of men brave enough to face the elements. When lightning struck a pine near the church, sending it crashing toward the bell tower, it was Elijah who scrambled up with ropes and an axe to clear the dangerous limbs. "He's the strongest man in the whole territory," Tommy declared proudly, as though he'd personally discovered Elijah Mason. Maria said nothing, but found herself transfixed by the mountain man's calm efficiency in the chaos. By morning, the storm had left its mark. Maria and Tommy picked their way through debris-strewn streets. The general store had survived intact, but the church roof was partially collapsed, and several smaller structures lay in ruins. Mayor Porter stood in the middle of Main Street, organizing recovery efforts. Elijah stood apart, quietly listening, axe resting on his shoulder. "Mason, we could use your strength at the schoolhouse," the mayor called, "if you're willing." Elijah nodded once, then turned to go. His eyes met Maria's briefly, and she found herself raising a hand in greeting before she could think better of it. "We're bringing food for the workers at midday," she said. "You're welcome to join." Something like surprise crossed his weathered features. "Thank you, ma'am." As he walked away, Tommy tugged at her skirt. "Can I go watch him work, Mama? Please?" Maria hesitated, then nodded. "Just stay out of the way." Throughout the morning she caught glimpses of her son trailing the mountain man like a faithful shadow, watching intently as Elijah demonstrated how to brace a damaged wall, split shingles or tie secure knot. Once, she saw Elijah patiently showing Tommy how to hold a hammer properly, his massive hands adjusting the boy's small grip with unexpected gentleness. At midday, Elijah sat apart from the other men, but Tommy plopped down beside him without hesitation, chattering away between bites of cornbread. For a man of so few words, Elijah seemed to listen well, nodding occasionally at her son's animated stories. When their eyes met over Tommy's head, Maria touched the wedding ring at her throat, a reflex born of guilt. Elijah noticed the gesture, his expression unreadable as he returned to his meal in silence. Winter descended on Elkridge with unforgiving fury. Snow piled in rifts taller than Tommy, and the wind found every crack in the Alvarez cabin's aging walls. For 3 days the blizzard had howled like a wounded beast, trapping them inside with dwindling firewood and a rapidly emptying pantry. "Mama?" Tommy's voice sounded thin beneath his blankets. "My throat hurts bad." Maria pressed her palm to his forehead and felt her heart sink. His skin burned against her touch. "I'll make you some tea with honey." But by evening, Tommy's fever had climbed higher. His breathing came in shallow gasps, and angry red patches blossomed across his chest when Maria checked beneath his nightshirt. "We need Dr. Wilson," she whispered, fear clawing at her throat. Maria tucked every blanket they owned around her son and wrapped herself in Joseph's old coat. "I'll be right back, mi vida. I'm going to get help." Outside, the cold stole her breath. The nearest neighbor, Mrs. Finch, was a quarter-mile away, but the old woman had no horse and little strength. The doctor lived in the next town, a journey impossible in this weather. The mountain. Elijah Mason had medicines. She'd heard Tommy chattering about the herbs and tinctures that lined the mountain man's cabin shelves, and he had a horse, a powerful creature, bred for these conditions. Maria forced her legs through snow that reached her thighs, each step a battle against the wind that threatened to topple her slight frame. Frostbite nipped at her fingers by the time she reached the trail that wound up toward Elijah's cabin. Halfway up, her strength began to fail. The wind cut through Joseph's coat like it was made of paper. Her legs trembled, refusing to lift high enough to clear the deepening snow. When she stumbled and fell for the 3rd time, something inside her crumbled. "Please," she sobbed into the howling darkness. "Please, I can't lose him too." Through tears and swirling snow she saw it, a lantern's glow, bobbing down the trail toward her. Then the massive silhouette behind it. Mrs. Alvarez. Elijah's voice carried over the wind as he rushed forward, strong arms lifting her effortlessly.
"What in God's name?" "Tommy," she managed through chattering teeth. "Fever? Can't breathe right." Understanding darkened his features. Without another word, he swept her onto his horse and turned the animal back toward her cabin. Inside, Elijah's large frame made the small home seem even smaller. He knelt beside Tommy's bed, his touch surprisingly gentle as he examined the boy. From his saddlebag, he produced a worn leather medical kit, its brass clasp polished by years of use. "Scarlet fever," he said grimly, opening the case to reveal neatly organized vials and instruments. "My wife was a nurse before." He stopped, focusing on measuring liquid from a brown bottle. "This will help the fever. We need to cool him down and clear his chest." Maria watched in stunned silence as Elijah worked with practiced efficiency, creating a poultice that smelled of pine and something sharper. "Where did you learn this?" she finally asked, as he showed her how to apply the mixture. "Elizabeth taught me," he answered quietly. "After we lost our daughter to typhoid, she made sure I knew how to treat everything from snake bites to chilblains." The confession hung in the air between them, perhaps the most words he'd strung together since arriving in Elkridge. Maria suddenly understood the shadows that haunted his eyes. Through the night, they worked together. Elijah melted snow for fresh water, stoked the fire with wood he chopped in the howling darkness, and showed Maria how to ease Tommy's breathing with steam tents. By dawn, the boy's fever had broken. "We need to get him to the doctor," Elijah said. "Exhaustion,
etching lines around his eyes. My horse can carry both of you. You've done more than enough. I'll take you, he interrupted, his tone leaving no room for argument. The journey to neighboring Riverford was arduous. Elijah walked alongside his horse, one hand steadying Maria, who cradled Tommy against her chest. By the time they reached Dr. Wilson's house, all three were exhausted. While the doctor examined Tommy, Maria and Elijah waited in silence. When the doctor finally emerged, his smile brought tears to Maria's eyes. He'll recover fully, Dr. Wilson assured them. Another day without treatment. He left the sentence unfinished, nodding respectfully to Elijah. Your quick thinking saved this boy's life, Mr. Mason. Later, as Tommy rested in the doctor's spare room, Elijah prepared to leave. Stay, Maria said softly. Please, you must be exhausted. He hesitated, then nodded once. They sat in companionable silence until Tommy stirred, blinking up at them with tired eyes. Mr. Mason, he whispered. Elijah leaned closer. I'm here, son. Tommy's small hand found Elijah's calloused one. Please marry my mom, he said, his voice fragile but determined. I need a dad like you. Silence filled the room like floodwater. Maria's face flushed crimson as she watched Elijah's expression transform from concern to shock. His broad shoulders stiffened, and something vulnerable flickered across his weathered features before disappearing behind carefully constructed walls. Tommy, Maria managed mortification threading through her voice. That's not something I should check on the horse, Elijah interrupted, rising abruptly. His head nearly brushed the ceiling as he stood. Without meeting her eyes, he strode from the room, the door closing softly behind him. Tommy looked confused. Did I say something wrong, Mama? Maria smoothed his hair back from his forehead. No, mi corazón. But sometimes grown-ups need time to think about big questions. That night, after Tommy had fallen asleep in the doctor's spare room, Maria found Elijah on the porch, staring at the distant mountains barely visible in the moonlight. He held a worn leather journal in his large hands, his thumb tracing absent patterns across its cracked spine. I'm so sorry, she said quietly. Children don't understand. No need to apologize. His voice sounded rough, like stone grinding against stone. The boy's been through enough. An uncomfortable silence stretched between them. Maria wrapped her arms around herself against the cold. You should go inside, Elijah said, finally turning to face her. Doctor says you can take Tommy home tomorrow. I'll come by at first light to escort you. Mr. Mason, Elijah, what you did for us. I don't know how to thank you. Something softened in his gaze. No thanks needed, Mrs. Alvarez. Maria, she corrected gently. After all this, I think you've earned the right to my given name. He nodded once, then gestured toward the door. Good night, Maria. True to his word, Elijah appeared at dawn with his horse saddled and ready. The journey back to Elkridge passed in relative silence, broken only by Tommy's occasional question about tracks in the snow or birds circling overhead. Each time, Elijah answered with patient simplicity, his deep voice rumbling like distant thunder. After seeing them safely home, Elijah tipped his hat and turned to leave. Will you come visit? Tommy called after him. Elijah hesitated. Got business up the mountain. Be gone a spell. Maria watched him ride away, a solitary figure against the vast whiteness. For 3 weeks there was no sign of the mountain man in town. Tommy asked about him daily, his disappointment growing with each sunset that found Elijah's absence unchanged. Meanwhile, the journal haunted Elijah's cabin. He'd left it open on his rough-hewn table, dusty sunlight illuminating words written years ago. April 18, 1867. Elizabeth says Lily's fever is finally breaking. Thank God. I've never felt so helpless. Watching my child suffer and being unable to do anything. A man isn't built for such helplessness. Elizabeth hasn't slept in 3 days. Her strength amazes me. April 30, 1867. Buried them both today. Lily first, then Elizabeth 3 days later. The typhoid took them so quickly at the end. The preacher spoke of God's will. Had to stop myself from striking a man of cloth. What kind of God? May 3th. 1867. Sold the house. Can't bear the emptiness. Heading west. Perhaps in the mountains I'll find some peace, or at least a quiet place to carry this weight. Elijah closed the journal, unable to read further. The boy's plea echoed in his mind. Please marry my mom. I need a dad like you. How could he explain that he'd failed at being a husband and father once already? That he'd been unable to save his own family? That the quiet solitude of his mountain exile was his penance? In town, whispers followed. Maria. News of Elijah's heroic rescue and Tommy's startling request had spread through Elkridge like wildfire. The mountain man hasn't been seen since, Widow Parsons told anyone who would listen. Scared him right back to his cave. That proposal did. Can you blame him? Replied Mr. Holloway. Man loses his family, builds a new life alone, then gets ambushed by a sick child's fantasy. Still, muttered Mayor Porter's wife, he could have shown his face just to be neighborly. Poor Maria, humiliated like that. But Maria felt no humiliation, only a growing concern for the solitary man who had risked everything to save her son. Each night as she tucked Tommy in, his prayers included a wish for Mr. Mason's safe return. And each night, Maria found herself adding her own silent hope that the mountain hadn't reclaimed him forever. On the 23rd day, as Maria swept the store's porch, a shadow fell across the weathered boards. She looked up to find Elijah standing there, hat in his massive hands, looking as uncomfortable as a bear in a china shop. Mrs. Alvarez, Maria, he corrected himself. How's the boy? Relief washed over Maria's face. Much better. The doctor says he's completely recovered. She set her broom aside. He's missed you. Elijah shifted his weight, his massive frame seeming too large for the narrow porch. Brought him something. From his pocket, he produced another small wooden carving, this time a bear standing on hind legs. He's at school, Maria said, accepting the gift. Her fingers brushed against his calloused palm. Would you like some coffee? Just brewed a pot. Surprise flickered across his face, but he nodded and followed her inside the store. Mr. Holloway's at the bank, she explained, pouring 2 cups, arguing about the ledger again. Maria slid the heavy leather-bound book across the counter toward Elijah. Its pages were filled with neat columns of numbers, many followed by alarming red marks. Bad winter for everyone, she said quietly, but the bank doesn't much care about blizzards or fevers when payments are due. Elijah studied the ledger, noting the mounting debt and decreasing grace period annotations. This land valuable? The store sits on a good plot, and our cabin has water rights to Miller's Creek. Maria's fingers tightened around her cup. Joseph always said that's why we got such a high mortgage rate. Bank knew the value. The bell jangled as Mr. Holloway returned, his round face flushed with frustration. He stopped short at the sight of Elijah. Mason, he acknowledged stiffly. Thought you'd gone back to whatever rock you crawled out from. Mr. Holloway, Maria interjected. Elijah was just, I know what he was just doing. Holloway cut in. Banks calling in loans all over town, meaning I can't afford to keep you full-time anymore, Maria. 3 days a week is all I can manage. The color drained from Maria's face. But sir, I can't. Take it or leave it. Holloway's tone left no room for negotiation. That's business. After he retreated to the back room, Maria sank onto a stool, her hands trembling slightly. 3 days won't cover the mortgage. Not even close. Elijah's jaw tightened. The bank manager, Fredericks, he giving everyone this treatment, some worse than others. Maria lowered her voice. Especially widows with good land and no husband to fight for it. 3 days later, Maria discovered a deer haunch hanging from her porch beam, dressed and ready for cooking. The following week it was a stack of split firewood that hadn't been there when she left for work. She knew who was responsible without having to ask. Tommy knew too. Mr. Mason left it, he announced proudly. I saw him from my window, but he put his finger to his lips, so I pretended to be asleep. The pattern continued. Whenever something was needed, repairs to the roof, a broken fence mended, game for the table, it appeared as if by magic. Though Maria sometimes caught glimpses of Elijah's tall figure slipping away at dawn. The town noticed. Never seen the mountain man in town so much. Widow Parsons observed over yarn at the general store. Comes in for supplies twice a week now. Seems to time his visits when a certain shopkeeper is working, added Mrs. Porter with a knowing smile. Maria ignored the gossip, but treasured the small moments when Elijah would stop by the store, ostensibly for supplies but lingering to ask after Tommy or offer quiet observations about the changing season. One afternoon, as Maria finished her shift, she found Henry Fredericks, the bank manager, waiting outside. His expensive coat and slick-back hair stood in stark contrast to the town's more practical attire. "Mrs. Alvarez," he said, tipping his hat with practiced charm. "May I walk you home? I can find my own way, Mr. Fredericks, thank you." "I insist." He took her elbow. "We should discuss your financial situation." As they walked, Fredericks spoke of mounting debts and limited options, his voice silky with false concern. "Of course, arrangements could be made. A woman in your position needs understanding creditors. My position, a widow, alone, struggling." His hand slid from her elbow to the small of her back. "I've always admired your resilience, Maria. Perhaps over dinner we could discuss more favorable terms." Maria stepped away from his touch. "I'll find another way, Mr. Fredericks." "There is no other way," he replied, smile hardening. "Unless you have a husband hiding somewhere who can make your payments. You have until the end of the month." Neither had noticed the tall figure across the street, watching with narrowed eyes as Fredericks finally departed. But Tommy, racing home from school, spotted Elijah immediately. "Mr. Mason," he called, running over. "Are you coming to dinner?" Mama made stew. Before Elijah could answer, Maria approached, her expression still troubled from her encounter with Fredericks. "Everything all right?" Elijah asked quietly. Maria hesitated, then forced a smile for Tommy's benefit. "Just bank business." Elijah's gaze flickered toward Fredericks' retreating form. "Bank business," he repeated, something dangerous flashing in his eyes. "Seems there's a lot of that going around." Tommy traced his finger along the polished bone handle of the hunting knife, his eyes wide with wonder. The blade gleamed in the early morning light, substantial but not overly large, perfectly sized for a boy learning to become a man. "It was my first," Elijah explained, his deep voice gentle as he supervised Tommy's exploration. "My father gave it to me when I was about your age." They sat on a fallen log behind Maria's cabin, early spring sunshine warming the crisp mountain air. Tommy handled the knife reverently, careful to keep the blade pointed away from himself, as Elijah had shown him. "Really, I can use it?" Tommy asked, hardly believing his luck. "With supervision," Elijah clarified, "and only after you learn the rules." He held up one large hand, counting off on his fingers. "Never point at anything you don't intend to cut. Always cut away from yourself. Keep it clean and sharp. A dull knife is more dangerous than a sharp one." Tommy nodded solemnly at each instruction. "Will you teach me to hunt and track animals and build traps like the ones you showed me at your cabin?" "One thing at a time," Elijah said, the corner of his mouth lifting slightly. "First, we need your mother's permission." As if summoned by her name, Maria appeared at the back door, a basket of laundry balanced on her hip. She paused at the sight of the knife, her expression hesitant. "Mr. Mason thinks I'm old enough to learn, Mama," Tommy called excited. Elijah stood, his imposing height made less intimidating by the careful way he approached Maria. "Boy, his age should know how to use tools safely," he said quietly. "I'd watch him every second." Maria studied her son's eager face, then looked up at Elijah. Something in his steady gaze reassured her. "I suppose Joseph would have taught him by now," she conceded. "But I have rules too." Later, as Elijah showed Tommy how to whittle a simple wooden peg, Maria watched from the window. The mountain man's patience surprised her. The same massive hands that could fell trees and wrestle livestock now moved with deliberate gentleness, guiding her son's smaller ones. "Look, Mama." Tommy ran inside at midday, proudly displaying a roughly carved wooden peg. "Mr. Mason says it's good enough for a first try." "It's wonderful," Maria agreed, ruffling his hair. "Wash up for lunch, you too, Mr. Mason," she called through the open door. Elijah hesitated before ducking his head to enter the small cabin. The table was set for three, a modest stew bubbling on the stove, The domesticity of the scene seemed to unsettle him momentarily. "You don't have to. Sit," Maria interrupted, placing a bowl before him. "You've been teaching my son all morning. The least I can offer is a meal." As they ate, Tommy chatted about all he'd learned. Maria noticed how Elijah listened intently, responding to each question with thoughtful consideration, rather than dismissal. "How did you learn all this?" she asked, as Tommy cleared the dishes. Elijah's eyes grew distant. "My father. Then the army. Then necessity." "The army?" He nodded once. "Union. Sharpshooter. Not something I speak of much. And after, U.S. Marshal for a time." His jaw tightened, almost imperceptibly. Until Elizabeth and Lily, Maria understood his reluctance to continue. "Tommy has his father's curious nature," she said, changing the subject. "Joseph was always taking things apart to see how they worked." Something eased in Elijah's posture. "Boy has a good mind, quick to learn." Their conversation was interrupted by a commotion outside. Tommy rushed to the window. "It's Billy and his friends. They're saying mean things about you, Mr. Mason." Elijah rose, but Maria caught his arm. "They're just boys repeating their parents' gossip." Indeed, they could hear the taunts clearly now. "Mountain freak. My pair says he's probably a deserter. Tommy's got a new daddy. Tommy's got a new daddy." Tommy's face flushed with anger. "I'm going to—" "You're going to nothing," Elijah said firmly. "Words can't hurt a man who knows his own worth." The next day at school, however, the teasing continued. When Billy shoved Tommy into the dirt, calling his mother names too vulgar for a child to repeat, something snapped. Tommy's hand went to his pocket, where the small knife Elijah had given him rested. "Take it back," Tommy demanded, his voice steadier than his trembling hands. Billy laughed, shoving him again. "Or what? Half pint?" The teacher's intervention prevented further escalation, but word spread quickly. By afternoon, Maria was summoned to the school, where Tommy sat stony-faced outside the headmaster's office. He threatened another student with a knife. The headmaster explained gravely. "I didn't take it out," Tommy protested. "I just told him I had it." Maria's heart sank. "It won't happen again," she assured the headmaster. That evening, Elijah arrived to find Tommy sullenly whittling a stick with a much smaller, duller knife than the one he'd been gifted. "Heard there was trouble," Elijah said, settling beside the boy. Tommy's eyes filled with tears of frustration. "They said awful things about Mama. And you." Elijah was quiet for a long moment. "Having a tool means knowing when not to use it," he finally said. "Especially in anger. But you fought in the war. You were a marshal, and I've regretted most fights I've been in." Elijah placed a large hand on Tommy's shoulder. "True strength isn't in showing the knife, son. It's in knowing you have it, but choosing a better way." The multicolored quilt stretched across Maria's lap as her needle flashed in the lamplight, adding another careful stitch to the intricate pattern. She'd started it after Joseph's death, a way to use his old shirts and preserve something of him. Now, 3 years later, it was finally taking shape. "Mama, Mr. Mason's here," Tommy called from the door, "and he brought trout for dinner." Maria set aside her sewing to greet Elijah, who stood awkwardly in the doorway, a string of gleaming fish in one hand. "Caught more than I can eat," he explained, his deep voice rumbling softly in the small cabin. The visits had become routine over the past weeks. Elijah teaching Tommy woodcraft or helping with repairs, often staying for the simple meals. Maria prepared. Tonight, she noticed, he'd trimmed his beard and worn a clean flannel shirt. As they ate, Tommy regaled them with stories from school, pride evident in his voice as he described standing up to Billy without threats or violence. "He just left me alone when I didn't get scared," Tommy concluded triumphantly. "Like you said, Mr. Mason." Maria caught Elijah's eye over Tommy's head. "Thank you," she mouthed silently. Later, after Tommy had gone to bed, they sat by the fire, the comfortable silence of growing friendship between them. "May I ask you something?" Maria ventured, picking up her quilting again. When Elijah nodded, she continued. "Why did you come back?" "After Tommy asked you to." She couldn't finish the sentence. Elijah stared into the flames. "Meant to stay away," he admitted. Thought it would be easier for everyone. His weathered hands opened then closed, as if grasping for words. Haven't belonged anywhere since Elizabeth and Lily died. Telling myself I preferred it that way. He glanced toward Tommy's door. Boy reminded me what it was to be needed. He admires you greatly, Maria said softly. Joseph was his father, Elijah replied firmly. I'm just helping where I can. The next morning brought an unexpected chill. Winter, making a final stand against approaching spring. Tommy woke with excitement. Elijah had promised to show him how to set rabbit snares today. But as Maria prepared breakfast, a sharp knock interrupted their routine. Mayor Porter stood on the porch, hat in hand. Maria, sorry to trouble you. Is Mason here? There's been an accident at the lumber mill. 2 men trapped. Elijah appeared behind her, already reaching for his coat. Where north building, beam collapsed. Without another word, Elijah was gone, his long strides eating the distance toward the mill at the edge of town. Maria and Tommy followed, joining the crowd gathered around the partially collapsed structure. Inside they could hear shouts and the groaning of stressed timber. Elijah had already removed his coat and was conferring with the foreman, nodding grimly at whatever he was told. It's too dangerous, the foreman was saying, as Maria approached. Whole thing could come down any minute. Then we work fast, Elijah replied, testing the weight of a nearby support beam. What followed seemed to stretch time itself. Elijah directed the rescue effort with calm authority, his experience as a marshal evident in how men instinctively followed his commands. When no one would volunteer to crawl into the unstable space, he went himself, disappearing into the rubble as the crowd held its collective breath. 30 agonizing minutes later, the first trapped worker emerged, supported by Elijah's massive frame. As they laid the injured man on a stretcher, Elijah turned back toward the building, ignoring the blood running down his own arm from a deep gash. Elijah, no. Maria called out, pushing forward through the crowd. You're hurt, he paused, meeting her worried gaze. One more man in there, ma'am. The timber groaned ominously as he disappeared again into the damaged structure. Minutes later, a terrible cracking sound preceded a partial collapse that sent screams through the gathered townspeople. Maria clutched Tommy to her, unable to breathe as dust billowed from the entrance. The silence that followed seemed eternal. Then movement. Elijah emerged, the second man draped across his shoulders in a fireman's carry, both covered in dust and blood but undeniably alive. As he gently lowered his burden to a waiting stretcher, Elijah finally stumbled, exhaustion and blood loss taking their toll. Dr. Wilson examined the gash on Elijah's arm, declaring it would need stitches. That'll leave another scar, Mason. What's one more? Elijah muttered, wincing as the doctor cleaned the wound. That evening, despite Dr. Wilson's advice to rest, Elijah insisted on returning to his cabin. He was halfway up the mountain trail when fever took hold, his steps becoming increasingly unsteady. By sheer force of will, he reached his door before collapsing inside. The infection spread quickly through his weakened system. For 2 days, he drifted in and out of consciousness, plagued by fevered dreams where Elizabeth and Lily called to him from shadowed forests. On the 3rd morning, he awoke to find Maria sitting beside his bed, her nimble fingers working on the colorful quilt he'd admired in her cabin. The cool weight of it was spread across his chest. "You're in my house," he said, his voice rough with disuse. Maria looked up, relief washing over her tired features. "You're in mine, actually. Tommy found you when you didn't come down the mountain." She pressed a cool cloth to his forehead. "The doctor said we shouldn't move you far." Elijah's gaze fell to the quilt, recognition dawning. "This is It's finished," she said simply, "and you needed it more than my memory box did." The land deed lay unfolded on Maria's kitchen table, its yellowed edges curling slightly in the spring humidity. Henry Fredericks tapped one manicured finger against the official seal, his practiced smile never reaching his cold eyes. "As you can see, Mrs. Alvarez, the terms were quite clear. Your late husband's loan is now 6 months in arrears." Fredericks straightened his waistcoat. I've been more than patient. Maria stared at the document, her fingers twisting her apron. We've never missed a payment until this winter. Surely the bank has shareholders, Mrs. Alvarez, people who expect returns on their investment. He leaned closer, his cologne overwhelming in the small room. Of course, as I've mentioned before, there are arrangements that could be made. The door swung open as Tommy burst in from school, stopping short at the sight of the banker. Elijah followed close behind, having met the boy at the schoolhouse, as had become their custom. Fredericks straightened, his expression souring. Mr. Mason, I wasn't aware you had become so domestic. Elijah's gaze moved from the banker to Maria's distressed face, then to the document on the table. He said nothing, but his presence filled the room like a gathering storm. Mr. Fredericks was just leaving, Maria said firmly, rising from her chair. Indeed, you have until the end of the month, Mrs. Alvarez. Fredericks gathered his papers, nodding curtly. Mason, after the banker left, Maria slumped back into her chair. He's going to take our home. Elijah picked up the deed, his eyes narrowing as he studied it. May I borrow this? It won't help, Maria sighed. He has the law on his side. Sometimes the law needs a closer look. Elijah folded the paper carefully. Trust me. The next morning, Elijah rode not to the mountains but toward the county seat. Courthouse archives were dusty and dimly lit, but the clerk recognized the former marshal and granted him access to the property records. Hours later, Elijah emerged, squinting into the afternoon sun, his expression grim. The land records showed something disturbing. The mineral rights to Maria's property had been separated from the deed shortly after Joseph's death, transferred to a holding company Elijah suspected was controlled by Fredericks himself. Moreover, there were irregularities in the mortgage papers, clauses that hadn't been standard practice when the loan was originated. In town, Maria was sweeping the store porch when Mayor Porter approached, his usual joviality replaced with concern. Maria, have you heard about the silver strike? She shook her head. Prospector found a vein just north of Miller's Creek, right where your property line runs. Porter lowered his voice. Suddenly makes sense why Fredericks is so interested in foreclosing, doesn't it? Maria's hands tightened on the broom handle. Are you certain? The assay office confirmed it yesterday. Not a massive deposit, but substantial enough to turn a handsome profit. Porter glanced around before continuing. There's something else. The mine inspector was in my office this morning. Apparently they're reopening the investigation into Joseph's accident. What? Why? New evidence suggests the tunnel collapse wasn't just bad luck. Porter looked uncomfortable. I shouldn't say more, but well, Joseph had been asking questions about claim boundaries before he died, making noise about improper surveys. The implications hit Maria like a physical blow. Are you saying someone caused the collapse? Porter raised his hands. I'm not saying anything, just that the timing is curious. What with the silver discovery and Fredericks pushing so hard on your property. That evening, Maria told Elijah what she'd learned. His jaw tightened as he placed the deed on the table between them. Found something too, he said, pointing to a clause buried in the legal jargon. This mortgage has an acceleration clause, triggered by mineral discovery. Fredericks could demand immediate payment in full if valuable minerals were found. But how would they know about the silver before it was discovered? Someone knew, Elijah said grimly. Joseph was a miner. Maybe he found indicators. Maria's hand went to her throat, fingers closing around her wedding ring. If what the mayor implied is true, if Joseph was murdered because of what he knew, Tommy appeared in the doorway, clutching his wooden horse and wolf. Mama, what's wrong? Maria forced a smile. Nothing, Corazon. Adult talk. After Tommy returned to bed, Elijah's expression hardened. I'm going to speak with Fredericks tomorrow. Elijah? No, if he's capable of what we suspect. I've dealt with worse men. The quiet certainty in his voice reminded Maria of his past as a lawman. Not alone, she insisted, reaching across the table to grasp his hand. Whatever this is, we face it together. Elijah looked down at their joined hands, momentarily startled by the contact. Then his larger hand enveloped hers. Together, he agreed. Neither noticed Tommy watching silently from the shadows of the hallway, his young face set with determination beyond his years. The faded wanted poster crackled beneath Frederick's manicured fingers as he slapped it onto his mahogany desk. The stern face of a younger Elijah Mason stared back from the yellowed paper, beneath bold letters reading, "Reward and U.S. Marshal." "You think I didn't know who you were the moment you rode into town, Mason?" Frederick sneered. "The famous marshal who brought down the Reynolds gang?" Elijah remained impassive, his large frame dwarfing the banker's plush office chair. "Then you know I recognize a swindler when I see one." Fredericks leaned back, feigning relaxation despite the tension vibrating between them. "Is that an accusation, Marshal? Or should I say former Marshal? After all, you left that life behind rather abruptly, didn't you? After what happened to your family?" A muscle twitched in Elijah's jaw, but his voice remained steady. "We're not here to discuss my past." "Oh, but we are." Frederick's smile sharpened. "You see, I've had friends inquiring about you ever since you started getting close to the Alvarez woman. Friends who remember how their brothers and fathers died in that Colorado raid you led." Elijah's expression betrayed nothing, but his knuckles whitened as he gripped the chair arms. The Reynolds were outlaws who murdered innocent people. They were businessmen with unorthodox methods, Fredericks countered. And now their sons have grown up. Imagine my surprise when I received a telegram from James Reynolds Jr. just yesterday. He was quite interested to learn where the man who killed his father had been hiding all these years. Fredericks slid another paper across the desk, a telegram with a Colorado return address. "He'll be arriving by week's end, with associates." "If this is meant to scare me away from Maria's property, this has nothing to do with that Spanish woman's worthless plot," Frederick snapped, his cultivated veneer cracking. "Though I admit it's convenient. You leave town immediately, disappear back into the wilderness where you belong, and perhaps I can persuade young Reynolds that you've moved on. The woman keeps her home at least until the bank's legitimate business concludes, and you keep your head." Elijah stood slowly, his height making the office seem suddenly smaller. "I know about the silver, Fredericks, and the irregularities in the deed, and I suspect you had something to do with Joseph Alvarez's death." Fear flickered across Frederick's face before he masked it. "Dangerous accusations without proof, Mason. I'm gathering proof, and when I have it, not even your money will protect you." Frederick's composed fully crumbled. "You have until tomorrow to leave town. After that, whatever happens to you or to the widow and her brat is your responsibility." Back at his cabin, Elijah methodically packed his saddlebags, his movements mechanical as his mind churned through options. The Reynolds gang had been vicious, 13 dead in their last train robbery before Elijah's posse had cornered them. He'd killed 2 of the brothers himself, including James Sr. Their children would have grown up on stories of revenge. They wouldn't stop with Elijah. Anyone close to him would be a target. Maria and Tommy. A knock interrupted his thoughts. Opening the door, he found Tommy standing there alone, his small chest heaving from the climb up the mountain trail. "What are you doing here?" Elijah demanded, scanning the forest behind the boy. "Does your mother know where you are?" Tommy shook his head, stepping inside without invitation. His eyes widened at the packed bags. "You're leaving?" Elijah hesitated. "I have to go away for a while. Because of the bad men. I heard you and Mama talking." Tommy's chin jutted forward. "We can fight them together." "This isn't your fight, son. You're running away," Tommy accused, tears welling. "Just when we need you most." Elijah knelt to meet Tommy's eyes. "I'm trying to protect you and your mother. These men, they're dangerous. They hurt people who get in their way. So you're just going to let Mr. Fredericks take our home? Let him get away with maybe killing my pea?" Tommy's voice cracked. "I thought you were brave." "This isn't about bravery, Tommy. It's about keeping you safe. That's what Pa always said too, that everything he did was to keep us safe." Tommy wiped his eyes angrily. "But he died anyway, and now we're not safe at all." The words hit Elijah like a physical blow. He remained silent as Tommy continued, the boy's words tumbling out through suppressed sobs. You said a man stands his ground when people need him. You said running away doesn't fix problems. Tommy's small fists clenched. You taught me to be brave, and now you're leaving. Elijah closed his eyes briefly. It's complicated, Tommy. No, it's not. Tommy stepped back toward the door. Either you care about us enough to stay, or you don't. The simplicity of the child's logic left Elijah without response. Tommy turned and ran from the cabin, disappearing down the trail before Elijah could react. Alone again, Elijah's gaze fell on the wanted poster he'd taken from Frederick's office. His younger self stared back, accusingly, the face of a man who had once sworn to protect the innocent, whatever the cost. When had he become someone who would run from a fight? Elizabeth's voice seemed to whisper from memory. The man I married would never abandon people who needed him. With deliberate movements, Elijah unpacked his rifle and began cleaning it methodically. His decision made, if Reynolds was coming, he would find Elijah Mason waiting. But first, he needed to make sure Maria and Tommy were somewhere safe. The worn shotgun gleamed dully in the lamplight as Maria ran a cloth along its barrel. It had been her father's, a remnant from his days as a frontiersman before he'd settled into ranching. She hadn't touched it since Joseph's death, but tonight her hands moved with remembered confidence over the weapon. A knock at the door startled her. She quickly slid the shotgun beneath the table before opening it to find Elijah standing there, his expression grave. Tommy made it home safely? He asked without preamble. Maria nodded. Went straight to his room. Wouldn't speak to me. She stepped back, allowing Elijah to enter. What happened between you two? He found me packing. Elijah removed his hat, turning it in his large hands. Maria, there's something I need to tell you. As Elijah explained about Frederick's threats and the coming danger from the Reynolds gang, Maria's face paled. When he finished, silence stretched between them. So you were leaving, she finally said, her voice carefully neutral. Without saying goodbye, I thought it would protect you both. Elijah met her gaze directly. I was wrong. Maria's hand drifted to the table edge, where the shotgun lay hidden. And now I stay and face them. His voice deepened with resolve. But you and Tommy need to leave town until it's over. This is our home. Maria's chin lifted in a gesture that reminded Elijah of Tommy's earlier defiance. I've already lost one husband to these mountains. I won't run from them. Maria, these men, I know what desperate men are capable of. She withdrew the shotgun from beneath the table. My father taught me to shoot before I could read. Joseph made sure I remembered how. Surprise flickered across Elijah's face, quickly replaced by something like admiration. This isn't your fight. It became my fight when Fredericks threatened my son. Maria checked the shotgun's action with practiced ease. When he possibly had my husband killed for silver beneath our land. Elijah studied her, seeing determination hardening her gentle features into something formidable. I can't ask you to risk yourself. You're not asking. Maria stepped closer, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to hold his gaze. I'm telling you how it's going to be. Something shifted in the air between them, a recognition of equals rather than protector and protected. Elijah's large hand moved as if of its own accord, brushing a strand of hair from her face with unexpected tenderness. You're the strongest woman I've ever known, he said quietly. Maria's breath caught Elijah. The moment stretched, taut with unspoken feeling. Then, with deliberate slowness, Maria reached up and removed her wedding ring from its chain. She looked at it in her palm for a long moment before closing her fingers around it. Joseph would want us to fight, she whispered. He would want us to live, not just survive. Elijah's hand enveloped hers, warm and steady. Then we fight, together. The door to Tommy's room creaked open, and they turned to find him watching them, his young face solemn. I knew you wouldn't leave, Tommy said to Elijah. Not really. Elijah knelt to meet Tommy's eye. I'm sorry I considered it, even for a moment. Tommy nodded, accepting the apology with a child's simple grace. What do we do now? Now, Maria said, pulling her son close, we make a plan. Dawn found them gathered around the kitchen table with Mayor Porter and Sheriff Davis, the latter skeptical but attentive as Elijah laid out what they knew. Accusations against a respected businessman like Fredericks need evidence, the sheriff cautioned. And this business about the Reynolds gang, they're just stories to scare children these days. They're real enough, Elijah countered. And they'll be here within days. Mayor Porter cleared his throat. I've seen the irregularities in the land records myself, Sheriff, and the mine inspector's report raises serious questions about Joseph's accident. Still not enough to arrest anyone, the sheriff maintained. Best I can do is keep an eye out for strangers and ask Frederick some polite questions. After they left, Elijah's expression was grim. We're on our own. Not entirely, Maria replied. Porter believes us. And I saw the doubt in the sheriff's eyes. He may not help openly, but he won't stand with Fredericks either. We need more allies. Elijah began pacing the small kitchen. And we need to get proof of Fredericks' schemes before Reynolds arrives. What about the mine? Tommy suggested suddenly. If Pa found something there, something Mr. Fredericks doesn't want anyone to know. Maria and Elijah exchanged looks. The boy has a point, Elijah admitted. The answer might be in that collapsed tunnel. It's been sealed since the accident, Maria said. The company claimed it was too dangerous to reopen. I wonder why. Elijah's voice was dry. Think you can get us access, Mayor? Porter nodded thoughtfully. Mining Commission owes me a favor. I could request an official inspection in light of the new investigation. As they continued planning, Maria noticed Tommy watching Elijah with renewed admiration. Despite the danger ahead, she felt a strange sense of rightness. For the first time since Joseph's death, they weren't just surviving. They were fighting back. The yellowed map of mined tunnels lay spread across Maria's kitchen table, its edges curling from years spent hidden between the pages of Joseph's Bible. Tommy had found it that morning, while helping Maria pack emergency supplies, his small fingers discovering the folded paper tucked into the book's leather binding. He never showed me this, Maria whispered, tracing the intricate network of passages beneath their land. Penciled notations in Joseph's handwriting marked several tunnels with symbols and measurements. Elijah studied it carefully. These don't match the official mining company maps. How can you be sure? Maria asked. Mayor Porter showed me their survey yesterday. Elijah pointed to a section of the map. This entire section is missing from their records. And look here, Joseph marked these spots with stars. Tommy leaned closer. What do the stars mean? I'd wager that's where he found silver, Elijah said grimly. Evidence that Frederick's company was mining outside their legal claim under your property. Maria's fingers tightened on the map. Joseph was going to report them, and the tunnel conveniently collapsed before he could. Elijah's jaw clenched. This is the proof we need. A sharp knock interrupted them. Maria quickly folded the map as Elijah moved to the door, his hand resting on the revolver at his hip. He relaxed slightly when he saw Mayor Porter on the porch, but the mayor's anxious expression immediately put him back on alert. 3 men rode in an hour ago, Porter said without preamble. Checked into the hotel. One matches the description of James Reynolds, Jr. Elijah's expression hardened. Earlier than expected. There's more, Porter continued. They went straight to the bank, spent nearly an hour with Fredericks. They're planning something, Elijah muttered. We need to move quickly. As Porter departed with a promise to keep watch, Maria turned to Elijah. The mine inspection, scheduled for tomorrow morning. Elijah studied the window sightlines, mentally calculating defensive positions. Too long to wait. I need to see that tunnel tonight. I'm coming with you, Maria stated, her tone brooking no argument. And me, Tommy added fiercely. Elijah shook his head. Tommy stays with Mrs. Finch, and you should too, Maria. The map is in Joseph's handwriting. She countered. I know his notations, his shorthand. You need me. As darkness fell, they made their preparations. Tommy reluctantly agreed to stay with their elderly neighbor, after Elijah knelt and spoke to him. Man to man. I need someone to watch over Mrs. Finch, Elijah explained seriously. Someone brave who can run for the sheriff if there's trouble. Tommy straightened, recognizing the responsibility being placed on his young shoulders. I won't let you down. After settling Tommy with Mrs. Finch, Maria and Elijah rode toward the abandoned mine entrance, keeping to the shadows. The old workings were officially condemned, the main shaft entrance boarded up with weathered planks bearing faded warning signs. Company men still patrol occasionally, Maria whispered as they dismounted. Joseph used to say they were more worried about claim jumpers than safety. Elijah nodded, testing a board before prying it loose with surprising quietness for such a large man. Stay behind me. Inside, the air was stale and heavy with mineral scents. Their lanterns cast elongated shadows as they moved deeper, following the map's guidance through the main tunnel. Water dripped somewhere in the darkness, the steady plink echoing ominously. Joseph's accident was in the North Branch, Maria said, her voice hushed, but his markings show the unauthorized digging was east. Elijah consulted the map again. This way. They had just turned into a narrower passage when a distant sound froze them both. Voices, and the unmistakable scrape of boots on stone. Someone else is down here, Elijah whispered, immediately dousing their lantern. In the sudden darkness, Maria pressed close to his side. They listened as the voices grew clearer. Need to remove everything before the inspection, a voice that sounded like Fredericks was saying. Reynolds doesn't want loose ends. What about Mason? Another voice asked. He'll be dealt with tonight. Along with the woman and boy, Maria's sharp intake of breath seemed impossibly loud in the confined space. Elijah's arm tightened around her protectively. We need to get back, he murmured against her ear. Now, they retreated carefully, avoiding the approaching lights. When they emerged into the cool night air, Elijah immediately helped Maria onto her horse. We need to get Tommy and go, Maria urged, fear evident in her voice. They'll be watching your home, Elijah reasoned. Mrs. Finch's place too. Then where? My cabin, Elijah decided. It's defensible, and they won't expect us to go up the mountain. They rode hard through the darkness, taking a circuitous route to avoid the main roads. At Miss Finch's cottage they found the old woman dozing in her rocking chair, but no sign of Tommy. He was right here, Mrs. Finch said, confused by their urgent questions. Reading by the fire not 10 minutes ago. A folded paper on the side table caught Maria's eye. She opened it with trembling fingers to find a childish scrawl. Went to warn Sheriff Davis about the bad men. Don't worry, I'll be careful like Mr. Mason taught me. Love, Tommy. Maria's face drained of color as she handed the note to Elijah. He's gone to town, alone. Outside they heard a horse approaching at speed. Elijah pushed Maria behind him, drawing his revolver, but it was Mayor Porter who appeared in the doorway, his face grave. Reynolds' men are searching the town, he panted. And Fredericks has convinced the sheriff that Mason is the threat. They're calling for your arrest, Elijah. Tommy's out there somewhere, Maria said, her voice breaking. He went to find the sheriff.
Porter's expression grew even more concerned.
Then God help him, because the sheriff is riding with Fredericks now. The tarnished marshal's badge caught the lamplight as Elijah placed it on Mrs. Finch's table. He hadn't torn it in years, had kept it buried in his saddlebag as a reminder of a life abandoned. Now, he picked it up with deliberate fingers, never officially resigned, he said quietly, pinning it to his vest. Still means something, whether Fredericks and his pet sheriff like it or not. Maria stared at the badge, understanding washing over her. You're not just a former marshal. No, Elijah confirmed. On leave, after Elizabeth and Lily died. Never went back, but never turned in my badge either. Mayor Porter's eyebrows rose. That changes things. Legally speaking, your authority might supersede Davis's, especially if you can prove corruption. First we find Tommy, Elijah said, buckling on his gun belt. Porter, gather any men you trust. Meet at the church in 30 minutes. What's the plan? Maria asked, checking her shotgun. We need a public confrontation. Fredericks thinks he has the town fooled and the law in his pocket. Elijah's eyes were steely. Let's prove him wrong. The town hall loomed dark against the night sky as Elijah, Maria, and Porter approached from different directions. A meeting had been hastily called, ostensibly to discuss the threat posed by the mountain man, according to the notices Fredericks had posted. Inside, lanterns illuminated a crowd of concerned townspeople. Fredericks stood at the front beside Sheriff Davis, both men scanning the gathering with nervous energy. Three hard-faced strangers, Reynolds and his men, lingered near the wall, hands never far from their weapons. Maria slipped in through the side door, keeping to the shadows as planned. Elijah would enter last, after Porter had begun the proceedings. Her heart hammered as she searched for any sign of Tommy among the assembled faces. Mayor Porter took his position at the podium, clearing his throat to gain attention. "Friends, we've been called here under concerning circumstances. Mr. Fredericks claims there's a dangerous element threatening our town." "Mason's a wanted man," Fredericks interrupted smoothly. "Sheriff Davis has confirmed it." "That's so?" Porter asked, nodding toward the back of the hall where Elijah now stood, Marshal's badge gleaming on his chest. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd as Elijah strode forward, his imposing presence parting the assembly like Moses at the Red Sea. Sheriff Davis's hand moved to his gun, but Elijah's quiet voice stopped him. "Touch that weapon, Davis, and you'll regret it." "You have no authority here, Mason," Fredericks sputtered, though his confidence visibly wavered at the sight of the badge. "United States Marshal Elijah Mason," he corrected, addressing the crowd rather than Fredericks. "And I'm here to arrest Henry Fredericks for fraud, conspiracy, and the murder of Joseph Alvarez." Murmurs erupted as Elijah continued, his deep voice carrying to every corner. "Fredericks has been mining silver illegally beneath Alvarez land. When Joseph discovered it, Fredericks had him killed in a staged accident." "Preposterous," Fredericks shouted. "Where's your proof?" "Right here," came a small, clear voice from the side of the room. All heads turned to see Tommy step forward from behind a group of townspeople. In his hands he held not only the tunnel map, but a leather-bound journal. "Tommy," Maria gasped, moving toward her son. "I found Pa's diary," Tommy announced, his young voice somehow steady despite the tension. "He wrote everything down, about the silver, about how Miss Fredericks threatened him, about the false boundary markers." Fredericks' face contorted with rage. "The delusions of a child and a madman," he spat. "Sheriff, arrest them both." Davis hesitated, looking between Fredericks and Elijah's marshal badge, clearly calculating his options. "That won't be happening," Elijah said calmly, "not with a federal marshal present and a room full of witnesses." Reynolds chose that moment to step forward, his hand resting on his holstered pistol. "This badge don't mean nothing to me, Mason. You killed my father. Your father was a murderer who shot a mail clerk for $40. Elijah replied evenly, "I arrested him according to the law. He drew on me, and now I'm drawing on you." Reynolds said, his movement lightning fast as he pulled his gun. The shot echoed through the hall, but it wasn't from Reynolds' weapon. Maria stood with her father's shotgun raised, smoke curling from the barrel. She had fired into the ceiling, freezing the room in shock. "The next one won't miss," she warned, her aim shifting to Reynolds. "My husband died because of men like you. I won't lose anyone else." In the moment of stunned silence that followed, Elijah moved with surprising speed for such a large man. Reynolds found himself disarmed, his gun clattering to the floor as Elijah's massive hand closed around his wrist. "It's over, James," Elijah said quietly. "Don't make the same mistake your father did." Something in Elijah's steady gaze must have reached the younger man. The fight seemed to drain from Reynolds as he stepped back, nodding once in grim acknowledgement. Fredericks, seeing his hired muscle falter, made a desperate lunge toward Tommy. "Give me that journal, boy." But Tommy was quicker, darting away as several townspeople moved to block Fredericks' path. Sheriff Davis, reading the shifting mood of the crowd, finally made his choice. He stepped away from Fredericks. "I think I'd like to see that evidence, son," Davis said to Tommy, extending his hand for the journal. As Tommy handed over the diary, Mayor Porter addressed the assembled townspeople. I believe we've heard enough to warrant a proper investigation. All in favor of detaining Mr. Fredericks until federal authorities can review these allegations. The response was overwhelming. Even those who had doubted Elijah now raised their hands, swayed by Tommy's evidence and Frederick's telling reaction. Elijah's eyes found Maria's across the room, relief evident in both their expressions. Tommy ran to his mother's side as Sheriff Davis, belatedly doing his duty, moved to place Fredericks under arrest. But Fredericks had one more card to play. With a desperate lunge, Fredericks pulled a derringer from his vest pocket. The small pistol glinted in the lamplight as he pointed it not at Elijah, but at Tommy. "Nobody moves," he shouted, his refined veneer completely shattered. "I'll kill the boy." The room froze. Sheriff Davis, halfway through holstering his weapon, stopped mid-motion. Maria's knuckles whitened around her shotgun, but she dared not raise it with Tommy in the line of fire. "Let him go, Fredericks," Elijah said, his voice deceptively calm despite the fear coursing through him. "This doesn't end well for you otherwise." "Shut up." Frederick's hand trembled slightly. "I'm walking out of here, and the boy's coming with me. Anyone follows, he dies." As Fredericks began backing toward the door, dragging Tommy with him, the boy's eyes met Elijah's across the room. In that silent exchange, something passed between them: trust, understanding, resolve. Tommy's small hand slipped into his pocket, withdrawing the folded handmade card he'd been carrying. "For my new dad," the childish writing declared on its front, visible to everyone as it fluttered to the floor. A deliberate distraction. In the split second Fredericks glanced down. Tommy stomped hard on the banker's polished shoe, then ducked and twisted just as Elijah had taught him when they practiced, escaping from a hold. The boy broke free, diving for the floor as chaos erupted. Fredericks fired wildly, the derringer's report deafening in the enclosed space. A window shattered. Women screamed. Elijah was already moving, closing the distance with astonishing speed for such a large man. Before Fredericks could aim again, Elijah's massive fist connected with his jaw, sending the banker sprawling. The derringer skittered across the wooden floor. Reynolds and his men, seeing their employer fall, made a move toward their weapons. Maria swung her shotgun toward them, her aim unwavering despite the chaos. "Don't," she warned, her voice cutting through the clamor. Something in her eyes, perhaps the same determined fire that had first drawn Elijah's attention, made the hardened gunmen reconsider. They raised their hands slowly. Sheriff Davis, belatedly asserting his authority, moved to secure Fredericks, who lay dazed on the floor. "Henry Fredericks, you're under arrest for attempted murder, fraud, and conspiracy." As the initial panic subsided, Maria rushed to Tommy, gathering him into a fierce embrace. "You brave, foolish boy," she whispered against his hair. "Don't ever scare me like that again." "I had to help," Tommy said, his voice muffled against her shoulder. "For Pa and for us." Elijah Chai approached them slowly, his expression a complex mixture of pride, relief, and lingering concern. "That was either the bravest or most reckless thing I've ever seen," he told Tommy, his deep voice gruff with emotion. Tommy looked up, a tentative smile forming. "You taught me to create a distraction if someone grabbed me. I didn't mean for you to test it against an armed man," Elijah replied, though a hint of admiration softened his stern tone. Meanwhile, Mayor Porter was examining the documents Tommy had brought. "Joseph's diary confirms everything," he announced to the assembled crowd. Fredericks' falsified claim boundaries threatened Joseph when he discovered the silver vein and ordered the support beams in the north tunnel tampered with. A wave of angry murmurs swept through the townspeople. Many had known Joseph, had attended his funeral, had watched Maria struggle in the aftermath of his death. "There's more," Porter continued, his voice rising above the noise. "Fredericks has been manipulating property records throughout the county, not just the Alvarez claim. Many of you may have similar clauses hidden in your deeds." The revelation transformed the crowd's mood from shocked observers to active participants. Demands for investigation into their own property records erupted from all sides. As Sheriff Davis led Fredericks away, the banker's final desperate glare fixed on Elijah. "This isn't over, Mason," he spat through bloodied lips. Elijah met his gaze steadily. "Yes, it is." Reynolds approached next, his expression unreadable, as he stood before Elijah. For a tense moment, it seemed the old vendetta might reignite. Then, unexpectedly, Reynolds extended his hand. "My father wasn't a good man," he said quietly. "Took me too many years to see it." He glanced at Fredericks being led away. "Some debts aren't worth collecting." Elijah hesitated, then clasped the offered hand briefly. Wise decision. As the town hall gradually emptied, Maria, Elijah, and Tommy remained, the three of them somehow forming a natural unit amid the scattered chairs and lingering tension. "It's really over?" Tommy asked, looking between the adults. Maria stroked his hair, her other hand unconsciously seeking Elijah's. "The worst part is," Elijah's large fingers entwined with hers, the gesture seeming both protective and seeking protection. "The truth has a way of demanding to be heard," he said, his deep voice rumbling softly in the emptying room. "Your father's truth finally was." Tommy bent down to retrieve his fallen card, "For my new dad," carefully smoothing its creased surface before offering it to Elijah with solemn ceremony. "I made this for you," he said. Before everything happened, Elijah accepted the simple gift with the reverence of a man receiving a priceless treasure, his weathered fingers tracing the childish letters as if memorizing their shape. "Thank you, son," he whispered, the word son falling from his lips as naturally as if it had always belonged there. The photographer's flash powder momentarily blinded them, leaving spots dancing in their vision. Maria blinked rapidly, trying to clear her sight as the man emerged from beneath his black cloth. "Hold still just a moment longer," he instructed, adjusting something on his camera. Tommy fidgeted in his Sunday best, uncomfortable in the stiff collar Maria had insisted upon. Beside him, Elijah looked equally constrained in a proper suit coat that seemed a size too small across his broad shoulder. Only Maria appeared at ease, her dark hair arranged simply but elegantly, wearing the dress she had sewn just for this occasion. Another blinding flash, and the photographer nodded in satisfaction. "A fine family portrait," he declared. "I'll have the prints ready by week's end." As they stepped outside the studio, Tommy immediately loosened his collar. "Did we have to do that today? The fishing's good at Miller's Creek after all that rain. Some moments deserve remembering properly," Maria replied, smoothing his unruly hair. "Today's one of them." Indeed, it had been a momentous morning. The federal marshals had finally concluded their investigation, with Fredericks now facing trial in Denver. The bank had formally rescinded all irregular claims, returning full ownership of the mineral rights to Maria, and the town council, in recognition of Elijah's service, had unanimously offered him the position of sheriff, the previous one having resigned in disgrace. "Still feels strange," Elijah admitted as they walked through town. "Having my face captured like that, you'll get used to it," Maria assured him, her hand finding his with casual intimacy. "A sheriff needs an official portrait." Elijah hadn't accepted the position yet. The idea of staying in town, of officially stepping back into a lawman's role, stirred complicated emotion. Part of him still yearned for the solitude of his mountain cabin, for the uncomplicated rhythms of a life lived apart. "Mr. Mason," Mayor Porter called, hurrying across the street. "Thought you should know the federal boys finished at Frederick's office. Found deeds to half the county in his safe, most with those same irregular clauses." "Anyone losing their land?" Elijah asked. Porter shook his head. "Quite the opposite. Judge has invalidated all the questionable contracts. The bank's new manager is offering fair terms to renegotiate." "Good news for everyone," Maria said, thinking of the many neighbors who'd faced similar threats. "Indeed." Porter hesitated, then added, "The council was hoping for your answer about the sheriff's position, Mason. Town needs a man we can trust." Elijah's expression remained unreadable, still considering it. After Porter left, they continued toward home in thoughtful silence. Tommy ran ahead to greet friends, leaving Maria and Elijah a moment of privacy. "You don't have to stay," Maria said quietly, though the words clearly cost her. "If the mountains are still calling you," Elijah stopped, turning to face her. "That's not the question that's troubling me." "Then what is?" His weathered face softened as he looked at her. "Whether I have the right to ask you and Tommy to accept me as part of your lives, permanently." Maria's breath caught. "Elijah, Joseph was a good man," he continued. "I wouldn't presume to replace him, but if you could find room in your heart, the room is already there." Maria interrupted gently. "Has been for some time now." Something shifted in Elijah's expression, a lightening as if a long-carried burden had finally been set down. His large hand reached up to touch her cheek with surprising tenderness. "I'm not a man of many words," he said simply. Maria smiled. "I've noticed." The moment was interrupted by Tommy racing back toward them, excitement evident in his flushed face. "Mama! Mr. Mason! They're putting up the sign!" They followed him to the general store, where workmen were indeed hanging a freshly painted sign, "Alvarez and Mason General Goods." Miss Holloway said, "Since you invested in the store, your name should be on it too," Tommy explained to Elijah, beaming with pride. Elijah looked startled. The investment had been practical, using some of the silver mine proceeds to expand the store. Maria managed so capably, he hadn't expected public acknowledgement. "Town's changing," Maria observed. "Maybe we're all allowed to change too." That evening, as Tommy slept and Maria sat, mending by the fire, Elijah paced the small cabin with unusual restlessness. Finally, he stopped and faced her. "I've been thinking about the sheriff's position," he began. Maria set aside her sewing. "And if I took it, I'd be tied to town, to regular hours, to responsibilities beyond myself." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "I'd need a home in town, not up on the mountain." "I see," Maria said, her expression carefully neutral. "What I'm trying to say, poorly," Elijah continued, "is that I don't want to be Sheriff Mason living in town while you and Tommy are up here. I want," he faltered, uncharacteristically uncertain. Maria rose and crossed to him, taking his large hands in her smaller ones. "What do you want, Elijah?" "A family," he said simply. "You, Tommy, a life together." "Are you asking me to marry you, Mr. Mason?" Maria asked, a smile playing at the corners of her mouth. Elijah's shoulders straightened, as if having named his desire gave him courage. "Yes, ma'am, I believe I am." The cabin blueprint spread across the kitchen table, its careful pencil lines showing a structure both familiar and transformed. Elijah's precise draftsmanship had expanded Maria's modest home, adding a new bedroom, a proper study, and an enlarged kitchen with large windows overlooking the creek. "The east wall stays," Elijah explained, his finger tracing the original structure within the new design. "It's the strongest part. We build around it, using the foundation that's already there." Maria studied the plans, moved by the metaphor unintentionally embedded in his practical explanation. "It's perfect," she said softly. The weeks following Elijah's proposal had passed in a whirlwind of activity. He had accepted the sheriff's position, moved his few possessions from the mountain cabin, and begun splitting his time between his new duties and preparing for their shared future. Tommy burst through the door, school books in hand. "Mr. Peterson says I can help with the sawmill this weekend," he announced. "Is that all right, Sheriff Mason?" Elijah, still startled slightly at the title, especially from Tommy. "If your mother approves, and you finish your schoolwork first, and if you promise to be careful," Maria added. "No distractions around the machinery." Tommy nodded solemnly. "I promise." He peered at the blueprint. "Is that our house? When do we start building?" "Lumber arrives next week," Elijah said. "Thought we'd have a raising, like folks used to do back east. Mayor Porter's already recruited half the town to help. Will it be done before the wedding?" Tommy asked eagerly. Maria exchanged a glance with Elijah. "That depends on when we decide to have the wedding." Nakuras. They hadn't set a date yet. Part of Maria had hesitated, wondering if it was too soon after everything that had happened. Another part, the practical side, knew that winter would soon make building difficult and a wedding before the snows would make sense. The Reverend asked me the same question yesterday, Elijah admitted. Said the church calendar is filling up for fall. Maria brushed her fingers over the blueprint, over the space that would be their shared bedroom. Perhaps we should decide then. Later, after Tommy had gone to bed, they sat on the porch steps, the evening air crisp with early autumn. Stars pricked the darkening sky, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote called to its mate. I rode up to my old cabin today, Elijah said, breaking a comfortable silence, to get the last of my things. Maria waited, sensing he had more to say. Stood there looking down at the town for a long while, he continued. Thought about how different my life is now from what I'd planned. Do you regret it? Maria asked softly. Elijah shook his head. Just the opposite. Realized I'd spent years building a fortress, not a home. His large hand found hers in the gathering darkness. I was surviving, not living. Maria leaned against his solid shoulder. And now I want a home, a real one. He turned to face her, his expression earnest in the fading light. October 12th. If that suits you, Maria blinked in surprise. The wedding? Elijah nodded. Reverend had an opening. I took the liberty of holding the date. A hint of uncertainty crept into his voice. If it's too soon, Maria silenced him with a finger to his lips. It's perfect. Then, with a mischievous smile, she added, Sheriff Mason, making decisive plans. The town would be shocked. Elijah's low chuckle rumbled through the darkness. Only decisive when it matters, Mrs. Alvarez. The following morning, Maria found herself alone in the general store, restocking shelves as she contemplated the changes coming to her life. The bell above the door jangled, and she turned to find Mrs. Porter entering with an armful of fabric. Wedding preparations wait for no one. The mayor's wife announced cheerfully, I've brought some samples for your dress. News traveled fast in Elkridge. Maria smiled as she examined the fine materials. How did you know? My husband is mayor, and your fiancé is sheriff, Mrs. Porter replied with a wink. There are no secrets in this town. As they discussed dress patterns, the conversation drifted to the cabin expansion. The men are organizing work crews already, Mrs. Porter informed her. Elijah may be a man of few words, but he's inspired quite a following. Half the town volunteered, before they were even asked. He would be embarrassed to hear that, Maria said. Good men often are, Mrs. Porter replied sagely. Your Joseph was the same way. He'd be pleased, you know, about Elijah, about Tommy having a father again. Tears pricked unexpectedly at Maria's eyes. You think so? I know so. Joseph loved you both too much to want you to live in shadows. Mrs. Porter squeezed her hand. Now about this neckline. By the time Elijah stopped by at midday, Maria had somehow acquired a dress design, offers from 3 different women to help with the cooking for the reception, and a list of wedding gifts already being prepared by various townspeople. Town's excited, Elijah observed dryly, noting the fabric samples stacked on the counter. They've adopted you, Maria replied. The mysterious mountain man becoming sheriff and family man makes for quite a story. Not sure how I feel about being a story, he admitted. Too late, Maria teased. Mrs. Finch is already telling everyone how she knew from the first moment you helped Tommy with the bullies that you'd end up part of our family. Elijah shook his head, but a smile tugged at his lips. Suppose some stories are worth being part of. As if to prove his point, Tommy raced into the store, breathlessly announcing that his classmates wanted to know if the sheriff would show them how to track deer prints after the wedding. After, mind you, Tommy emphasized. They know family comes first. Elijah's expression softened at the word family, his eyes meeting Maria's over Tommy's head. In that shared glance was a promise, a future, a home being built not just of lumber and nails, but of moments like these, small, ordinary, and infinitely precious. The carved family totem stood on the mantelpiece of the expanded cabin, its polished wood gleaming in the autumn sunlight. Elijah had worked on it secretly in the evenings, his large hands creating surprising delicacy in the interwoven figures. a bear representing himself, a falcon for Maria, and a young wolf for Tommy. Their forms twisted together protectively, forming a single unified shape while maintaining their individual identities. 1 year had passed since that fateful day when a small boy had asked a mountain man to marry his mother. Now the October afternoon glowed with golden light as friends and neighbors gathered to celebrate not just the anniversary of their wedding, but the formal adoption ceremony that had taken place that morning at the courthouse. Tommy Mason, no longer Tommy Alvarez, proudly showed off the official papers to anyone who would look, the ink still fresh on the document that legally confirmed what had been true in their hearts for months. "Congratulations, Sheriff," Mayor Porter said, clapping Elijah on the shoulder. "Fatherhood suits you." Elijah's weathered face softened as he watched Tommy enthusiastically describing the courthouse proceedings to his friends. "He makes it easy," he replied. "And how does married life treat you?" Porter asked, with a knowing smile. Before Elijah could answer, Maria appeared at his side, slipping her hand into his with the easy familiarity of a year's companionship. "He complains about my snoring," she teased, "but I notice he's never once gone back to sleep on the mountain." "Not a chance," Elijah rumbled, his arm wrapping around her waist. The past year had transformed them all. Maria's business had flourished, the store expanding its inventory and clientele under her skilled management. Elijah had brought peace to Elkridge. As sheriff, his quiet authority rarely challenged, after word spread of how he'd handled Fredericks and the Reynolds gang. The town itself had grown. New families attracted by the stable leadership and economic opportunities created by the legitimate development of the silver mine, now properly licensed and paying fair wages. Tommy had perhaps changed the most visibly, shooting up several inches and losing some of his childish roundness. Under Elijah's patient guidance, he'd become skilled with tools and woodcraft, while Maria ensured his schooling remained a priority. The once shy boy now moved with confidence among both children and adults, secure in the knowledge of his place in the world. As the celebration continued, Dr. Wilson approached with his wife, both beaming with approval. "Never thought I'd see the day," the doctor said. The mountain hermit with a family. "Medicine can heal many things, but some cures only come from the heart." Speaking of medicine, his wife interjected with a meaningful glance at Maria. "Have you told him yet?" Maria blushed slightly. "Julia, please." But it was too late. Elijah's sharp eyes had caught the exchange, his questioning look moving between the women. "Told me what?" Maria took a deep breath, suddenly shy despite their year of marriage. "I was going to wait until tonight, when we were alone. Maria's been to see me professionally twice this month." Dr. Wilson explained, his professional discretion evidently overcome by excitement. "All signs point to a blessed event come spring." Elijah froze, his expression one of stunned disbelief. "A baby?" Maria nodded, her eyes searching his face anxiously. "Are you pleased?" For a man of few words, Elijah's reaction spoke volume. Without regard for the gathered guests, he swept Maria into a gentle but fervent embrace, his large hand cradling the back of her head as he pressed his forehead to hers. "More than pleased," he whispered, his deep voice rough with emotion. Tommy, sensing something important happening, pushed through the crowd to their side. "What's going on? Why is everyone looking at you two?" Maria extended her arm, drawing him into their embrace. "How would you feel about being a big brother, mi corazón?" Tommy's eyes widened comically. "Really? When?" "Spring," Elijah answered, one arm still around Maria while the other settled on Tommy's shoulder. "You'll have to help us get ready." "I will," Tommy promised fervently. "I'll teach the baby everything, how to fish and track and whittle, just like you taught me." As word spread through the gathering, well wishes and congratulations poured in. Elijah found himself accepting backslaps and handshakes with uncharacteristic patience, his usual reserve softened by joy. Later, as twilight descended and the last guests departed, the three of them, soon to be four, stood on the porch of their expanded home. Tommy had finally succumbed to the day's excitement, falling asleep despite his determined efforts to stay awake like a man. In the quiet that followed, Elijah drew Maria close, his hand resting gently on her still flat stomach. "Never imagined this," he confessed, after Elizabeth and Lily thought that part of my life was over forever. Maria covered his hand with her. Life has a way of offering second chances when we least expect them. Second chances, Elijah echoed, gazing out at the mountains silhouetted against the darkening sky. Those same peaks that had once been his refuge from the world now stood as silent witnesses to his return to it, not as the broken man who had fled there, but as husband, father, and protector. "Thank you," he said simply. "For what? For Tommy's courage that day. For your trust afterward." Elijah's voice deepened with emotion. "For showing me that strength isn't about surviving alone. It's about building something worth protecting." As stars appeared overhead, they remained on the porch, wrapped in the comfortable silence of two people who had found in each other not just love, but home. The handwritten letter trembled slightly in Thomas Mason's weathered hands, its yellowed pages carefully preserved, despite the decades that had passed. At 63, his once dark hair now showed more silver than brown, but his eyes still held the same determined spark they had when he was 8 years old. "Dad always kept this," he explained to his grandchildren gathered around the fireplace of the expanded family homestead, now a sprawling ranch house that had grown with each generation. "He wrote it the day my sister Elizabeth was born." The children leaned forward eagerly. They'd heard pieces of the family story throughout their lives, but never the whole tale at once. Thomas unfolded the fragile paper, revealing Elijah Mason's surprisingly elegant handwriting, April 18, 1876. "My son, today your sister Elizabeth Maria Mason came into this world, strong-lunged and perfect in every way. Your mother is resting now, exhausted, but radiant. As I watch over them both, my thoughts turn to you, and to the extraordinary courage you showed that day. You tugged on my sleeve and asked me to marry your mother. I was a broken man then, believing myself destined to live and die alone in those mountains. One small boy's simple request, born of love and hope rather than calculation, changed the course of not just my life, but countless others. The town of Elkridge thrives now. Families build homes where once there was only wilderness. Children play safely in streets I'm proud to protect as sheriff. None of this would exist had you not been brave enough to ask for what you needed. I've learned that the greatest acts of courage aren't always found in battlefields or shootouts, but in simple human connections, in reaching across the divide between souls to offer friendship, family, love. When your sister is old enough, tell her the story of how our family began. Tell her that sometimes the bravest thing a person can do is to voice their heart's deepest wish, even when the answer might be no. With pride and gratitude, your father, Elijah Thomas, carefully refolded the letter, looking around at the rapt faces of his grandchildren. That letter is why I became a teacher, he told them. I wanted to help children find the courage to speak their truths and shape their own destinies. His granddaughter Sarah, named for his mother, Maria's mother, spoke up. But weren't you afraid, Grandpa, when you asked Miss Mason to marry your mum? Thomas smiled, remembering. Terrified. But sometimes being brave doesn't mean not being afraid. It means doing what needs to be done despite the fear. What happened to the bad banker? Asked 7-year-old Elijah, named for the great-grandfather he'd never met. Miss Tredrick spent many years in prison, Thomas replied. But the story isn't really about him. It's about how a single moment of courage can change everything. How one question asked from the heart can build a legacy that lasts generations. He gestured around the room, to the family portraits spanning decades, to the carved wooden totem that still held pride of place on the mantel, to the gathered faces of children and grandchildren who would never have existed if a small boy hadn't dared to speak his wish aloud. Life doesn't always give us what we want, Thomas continued. But sometimes, if we're brave enough to ask, it gives us what we need and more than we ever dreamed possible. The old ranch house fell silent as each person contemplated their own place in this continuing story. Outside, the mountains stood unchanged, the same peaks that had once sheltered a lonely, grief-stricken man now watching over the thriving family his love had built. "What impossible thing are you brave enough to ask for?" Thomas finally said, his voice gentle with wisdom. "What dream seems too daring to speak aloud?" The most powerful words in any language might just be these: "Please, I need you in my life." He carefully returned the letter to its protective sleeve, this tangible piece of family history, a testament to how vulnerability can become strength, how needs voiced can become dreams fulfilled. Before we continue with more of our family stories, I'd love to know where you're tuning in from today. The Mason family saga has touched hearts across the country, and if this story of a boy's bravery and a mountain man's redemption has moved you, be sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you, the tale of how your great-grandmother Maria saved an entire town during the Great Flood of 1883, armed with nothing but determination and her famous shotgun.